returning then to the topic of modelling things like that in Wings 3D, when I made that I was thinking, would it be nice if I could get these corner cubes a different colour to these middle face cubes, but because I'd modelled it all in one object, it's very difficult to separate out the materials after that so that Bryce can render them in a different material. So what I need to do is create two objects in Wings that have this same interlocking relationship, so we'll have a look at that. I would also point out that you can create these shapes using tetrahedrons, octahedrons, dodecahedrons, icosahedrons, whatever you fancy, but obviously as the number of faces go up, then the complexity of the model goes up and the time it takes to process it in Wings becomes much larger. So we'll stick with cube for now, and we'll select the entire object selection cube of the cube here, so that just selects that, then select face and right click, and we've got our menu that modifies itself according to which particular selection has been made. You can make the selections here on this top bar as well, but I keep forgetting that because this is in the newer version of Wings. I'm going to inset the faces, and as before hold the control key down, and this time I'm going to inset it just 20. And now I'm going to right click again and I'm going to intrude, but I'm not going to bother holding the control key down. We'll take a slightly different approach and just intrude it a bit, but still so you can see some of the inside is visible. Now mouse wheel will let me roll this forward, and middle mouse button rotate it. Press space to deselect everything. I'm going to use this selection tool here for the edges. Select the inside edge, press I for identical, right click and then bevel that to the full extent that it allows. Now at this point these corners here will have got multiple corners in because it's beveled out and pushed a corner out to join the other corner there, so there's actually a very thin face hidden in there somewhere. So what I'm going to do is select the entire object, right click and use the cleanup option. That will now have fused any extra corners in there into one, and that will now be just a single line there. So that's an important step. Right, the next thing to do is edge selection tool, select two edges like that, press identical so all the internal two edges are selected, press C and that will connect the middle of those two, right click and bevel. So now we've got these little faces in here, and this cube's ready to be duplicated because I'm going to need two models, one that's going to be the faces of the cubes and one that's going to be the corners. So I'm going to select the entire object, right click and duplicate, and I'm going to use Y-axis for the duplication choice, and I'm going to hold the control key down, or I'm going to hold the shift key down because each one does a different level of movement steps. So let's try the control key first. Okay, that's sort of in point ones of a step, and I'll just use the shift key and that takes it up 1, 2, 3, 4. So we'll take it up 4 big steps for this. Now I want to use the identical selection for some of these faces, but I'll show you the problem. Just any face will do. Supposing I wanted to select all the faces like that on this cube, if I use identical it picks up the other cube as well, which is not going to be convenient. So what I'm going to do is going to take this top cube, I'm going to right click, I'm going to scale uniform, and holding the control key down I'm going to take it down to 50% of its original size. In this case now, when I select a face and press identical, the other faces don't get selected because I've changed the scale, but I can restore the scale later on by scaling uniform up 200%. So that's the idea behind that. Right, and now I'm going to select a little internal face there, that's a corner, and on this other model, if I can get hold of it, I just need to move my view around a bit, select one of these faces that I created earlier. So now if I press identical, all the internal corners are selected on this one, and all those little internal faces are selected on that one. Right click, I'm going to extrude and normal, and again holding the control key down, you can see I can control the level of extruding, which is handy, but there's a slight problem. This is the next problem to be aware of. Look how it's extruding. One's getting extruded more than the other because of the difference in scale. So each of these is going to have to be processed in turn, and the level of extrusion has got to be half for the one above. Okay, so just select the corners like so. I'm just showing you some additional steps because obviously there's a few problems using the identical command again. Right click and extrude normal, and now just make sure that whatever I do, if you look at the top left hand corner, is going to be easily divisible by 2. So if we do it at 0.6 for example, and then I'll go for the top shape now and get that little face. If I want to focus on anything on the top shape, like I can't hit that little square very easily, or I can, but I'll pretend I can't. Suppose I can just get that face there. If I press A, that'll refocus it on the selected faces, and then I can select the little internal face, press identical, and then I'm going to use extrude again, and normal, and do it 0.3. So each of these then, because of the difference in scale, will have been extruded the same amount. Right, now I can use the mirror command, but I'm going to get those little internal triangles as well. So I've selected one of the internal triangles down there, press identical, and then I'm going to right click and mirror, and that's created my 2 lots of shapes that I'm going to use to interlock. Go back to the entire object selection tool, and I'm going to select this entire object. I'm going to scale uniform. I'm going to take it up to 200%, holding the what am I holding down? I'm holding the shift key down in this case, so it takes it up by enough steps. So there we go, that's one object, that's the other object. Now I just need to drop one into the other, but before I do that, I've got all these little sticks sticking out inside the object that I use to generate the shape. So what I need to do is select a face on the inside of that, press identical so all those faces are selected, and then I can press plus, and whoops, I've forgotten about the fact that I've got the other faces selected in the other one. I should have done the scaling afterwards. So Control Z, just show you that that's, if you hold Control and Alt down, you can take it further steps backwards, which is worth knowing. So Control, Alt and Z will take me back to the unscaled position. I can get rid of the sticks in this scaled down version here. So select an internal face, press identical, press plus, press delete. That's got rid of those. I might as well process this other one at the same time. So I'll just select, I can't select the triangle very easily, so I'll just select one of the sides, press A to realign the scene on that, press space to deselect, select a face, select one of the internal triangles, press I for identical, press plus to extend the selection, and press delete to get rid of them. So I've got rid of those little sticks now. I can now select the object above, so press space to deselect everything, select entire object, select the object above, right click, scale uniform while holding the shift key down, take it up to 200%, and then move Y, holding the shift key down again. I can drop the shape back in. So I've created my interlocking cubes now. I'll select each of the cubes and I'm going to right click. Now before I do this, I could choose to do Sabian subdivision now, or I could sharpen the corners up like I did last. I think I'll sharpen the corners up. So if I select this line, which is an edge, because everything's to scale now, it should select the edges on the other cube. So try that, identical, right click and bevel, and that'll just sharpen that edge up. Right, I'll try smooth. We'll see what that looks like. So just press S to smooth, press S to smooth again, and I'll risk one more. Press S to smooth again. You can see the progress along the bottom. So that should have done it. So there, right, press space, and I use the object selection tool. You can see there are now 2 distinct objects that we can use in our render. So Bryce should be able to pick up on that. So go File and Export Object, and we'll go to Tutorial to Woven Cube 1. Right, and then we'll have to wait for it to export. See the progress bar on the bottom. It seems to take a lot longer when it gets to this very end here, and you must wait for it to fully export before you try and import it into another piece of software, because otherwise it'll only pick up part of the information and it'll end up with holes in the objects and possibly an error. So it'll just take a little while to export because of the increasing complexity of the object by pressing smooth so many times. If you'd done this with a dodecahedron, you wouldn't be able to smooth it as much because the object becomes so complex then it tends to crash wings. And I have made wings large addressor wear. If you want to know more about large addressor wear, there is a video for that. Okay, right. At this point now, we go back into, well, we just go into Bryce. So I've been testing this, so for me it's back into Bryce. Import the object and find it now. So where were we? Tutorial cube, there it is. Just check that and say yes. You can see the progress. The speed of this bar indicates the complexity of the model. Right, and at this point 3 for the right hand view. You see it's not coming at ground level, so we can land it, but usually there's a bit of a bounding box that's bigger than your mesh anyway, so it won't be properly landed. Render from this view, and you might be touching the ground, or there might be a slight gap. To me it looks like there's a slight gap there, so just drag it into the ground to make sure it's touching the ground so it's not a floating object, and then you can start setting your scene up in Bryce. So before I did true ambience rendering, which is quite time consuming, I think this time what I'll do is I'll use one of the metals packs that Haro and I made, and that can use the HDRI backdrop reflection and much simplified lighting, but you should still get a good effect. So we'll set that up now. Right, if you feel there was any discontinuity just there, that's because I've taken the trouble to save the scene and also locate the appropriate content for this project. Right, so the first thing I'm going to do is go into the Skylab, image-based lighting, use HDRI image, open, and find the HDRI that's associated with the metals that I'm going to use. So we've got HDRI here, heating room. I'm going to use this lower pixel diameter HDRI image because what's going to be seen is going to be in the reflections, not as part of the backdrop. So you can get away with a lower resolution, saves the memory footprint of your source file. So just open that. You can see it's looking a bit dark there. Might be worth tone mapping it on that basis so you can see the backdrop. I use rendering scene here, but obviously we've got just direct lighting from the HDRI image, which is what we're going to use. I'm going to set the quality down to 16 to improve render time. I don't need specular output because I'm going to use the sun on the material. I'm going to increase the intensity of that a bit so it shows up, but we've not got any reflective materials on the object yet. I'm going to render and add to sky as the user backdrop because I'm going to render with the atmosphere off. I'm just going to increase the intensity of this and preview it in here because the HDRI is going to be used to fill in the shadow regions. So we'll turn the sunlight on as well. You can see it's quite well lit now because I'm going to need the specular component of the sun to work with the metals effects that the materials are going to supply. Okay, right. Well, we'll use this as our opening gambit. I'm going to narrow the field of view to focus on the object in this scene and just give you an idea of the render time now. So it's only taking seconds to render, but as yet we've got no reflective materials in the scene, and the reflections do make a difference because it increases the amount of ray calculations that the render engine has to do. So let's look at the ground first. So I'll just make some material choice for the ground. What we've got here are metals 2 materials I've already added to the library to save time. I quite like this one with the concentric rills. We'll see how that looks in this scene. You do get this moire. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that. It's the interference effect anyway that's caused by the grid level of pixels and this high frequency pattern that's on the ground. I think it's looking a bit bright at the moment, which might mean I'll go into Skylab and I'll untone map it and then just increase the intensity. I'll give it a higher contrast backdrop there with the lights. So there's if you use tone mapping, it tends to lower the entire contrast of the backdrop image, and we'll see whether that's lights coming from that or it's just coming from the light sources around. So I might choose a darker material for the ground. So material in here, let's have a look what we've got. What I've got that's a bit darker. That's quite nice. Right, and render that one. So you can see that the light is quite bluish as well from the HDRI backdrop. So on these then we'll want just 2 different metals to show the difference between the 2 models. So if I hold the control key down and left click where the cube is, you can see there's the entire cube model, which is the group here, and then right click again, there's the two components. So that probably to make life easier for yourself, it's a good idea to select the components. So that could be like and change the name inner group, inner selection. It's not really a group, is it? And if you change the family grouping of that so you can identify it in the wireframe, and then hold the control key down, left click, and we've picked up the outer group, or the edge group, or the edge selection, let's call it. I shouldn't call it a group. Edge selection, and use a different family grouping for that, green. Okay, and the two objects are grouped together. If you change the family group of the entire group at this point, it'll reset all the internal groups, which is less than helpful. So we can use a family selection here. So there's the outer edge one. Select the material. I'll give it a metal material. These reflective coppery colour ones might be nice. Let me try that one out. So there we go. So the highlights along the edge here as a result of picking up the high dynamic range image backdrop, and we'll select the inner one now, and probably for contrast choose a dull material. There we go. So at this stage I'm thinking I might want to rethink what I've got on the ground because it's rather dominating the image. I'll try the same material on the ground as I've got on the inner grouping. So there we go. Well, that's not too bad. Okay, right, I've got a lot of space at the edges here, so I'll change the aspect ratio of the image and drop it down to 700. Right, so that's Camtasia causing that little problem there where it stalled, and then I can narrow the field of view then. So at this stage, as you can see, the render time is only seconds, and there's always that temptation to sort of throw in more effects. If we're not using transients, if we're taking advantage of the reflectiveness of this material and having the HDRI backdrop to create more of an illusion of ambience, I've just rotated the sun around to show this side, then if you were using, say, depth of field effect, like so, let's select the I know, we'll do it properly. We'll create a target object. So I've just created a sphere. I'll shrink it down. That allows me to position the focus of the depth of field very accurately on the model. So if I put it on this top corner by switching views, I'm using the 1, 2, 3 keys on my as a shortcut to shift the camera views. One is the perspective camera view. This object can be made invisible in the render by just selecting hidden. We can call it target. Right. So now if I go into render options, premium effects, 64 rays per pixel is usually very good for depth of field. Any more than that is a bit of a waste, really. Wouldn't possibly be enough for transients, but if we're just using this effect, it'll not be too bad on the render time. In fact, you can get away with 36 sometimes. If I set current selection, which is that sphere, which is invisible, there you go, then that will make sure that the corner of this model is in focus. So the thing I have to do is determine if the level of softness further away is too much or sufficient, by which I mean, is it too blurred? And if it gets more blurred, you need more rays per pixel. You can get away with less rays per pixel, for example, if it's not too blurred. If you want it to be more blurred, you need to increase the lens radius. If you want it less blurred, you need to reduce the lens radius or move the field of view for the not the field of view, the focal point of the depth of field effect. So I'm just looking at that. You see, I've reduced the rays per pixel, but because it's not that soft, in the background here it's getting quite grainy, but it's not really the focus of the image anyway. So, and you could always use some post-production effects on that to soften the backdrop still further or split it out. So the render time's not too bad, 7.5 minutes. So I'll let that render out. We'll look at the results. Then, if you have a slower computer, I suppose we could just do a quick example of how you could blur the background and separate it from the object by using an object mask. But as you can see, this is not going to be too painful, really. So I'll just let that render. Well, as you can see, that's just completing now. I would mention that another advantage of using the premium effects is that the premium effect render engine is an improved version of the regular render, and the extra sampling does add a bit of bit of a finer detail to the bump mapping effect on your materials, so you get very nice fine details here. But obviously there is a cost in render time, as you can see, and on slower machines the cost gets higher. Right, and this edge also is looking a bit furry. I think this would be a better render with higher rays per pixel, which obviously once this is completed we can find out how long that would take to do just by doing the first pass and letting Bryce estimate how long it's going to take. Alternatively, we could try and use post work to simulate the effect that we're going for, because it's only a very subtle depth of field effect. So what I'll do is just save this as it is. So do File and Save As, and because I saved the first scene with a 1 on the end, look up here, scene 1, using Save As will automatically increment the number at the end, so that is a handy feature. Okay, so that's just saving. You can see because of the complexity of objects it took a little while to save. Right, and we'll go render options, and we'll see what it's going to be for 256 rays, which is probably going to be quite a slow render because of the reflections. So there's inter-reflections between the materials in the scene, and obviously the extra sampling to get the smoother depth of field is going to add considerably to the render time. What we'll do is we'll also plot render one of these corners just to look at the improvement. I'll reload the scene so you can have a comparison. First of all, let's find out how long it will take to render out at this. Okay, 2 hours 18. Right, so File, revert to saved, revert. Right, and then I'll just go render options, 256, and then just render a very small area with the plot renderer here. And you can see, once I've got the plot renderer out of the way, I could turn it off with one of these controls, I think, that one there, that there's less noise in that part of the image. But obviously, compared with 8 minutes, it's going to take a lot longer to render. So what we'll do is go render options, regular, and then render this as it is. Now, it'll lose out slightly on the lack of sampling with the material, so it just tends to be a bit coarser, and I like to use the premium effects even just to get the extra sampling on the materials. The fine art anti-aliasing does seem to take a lot longer, particularly with soft shadow effect. The premium effect works a lot faster with soft shadows, but there's more noise in the soft shadows, so you need a higher selection. But the fine art, I think, is more closely related to the regular rendering engine than the premium one. I'm not really sure of my facts there, it's just what I've observed. As you can see, we're just on the anti-aliasing pass now, and you can improve the rendering with this by, you can see here, look at this pixelation along the edge. By changing the way it samples for the anti-aliasing, you can, but that, I suppose that's another topic entirely. Could go on for ages about that. Let's try and stick to what I was planning, and that is to create a depth mask to process this image in PaintShop Pro. So really, if you're not really interested in that aspect of it, then I suppose the tutorial's over, because this is going to take a little bit of working out. But as you can see, if you're using the anti-aliasing paths here, it can take time depending on the complexity of the materials, because the anti-aliasing path looks at the level of noise in your image, and depending whether the 2 pixels side by side are different enough, it will then start sending in more rays to sample that part of the image, which is why if you've got very noisy images, the anti-aliasing path will take a lot longer. Okay, right, it's nearly come to an end now. So I'm going to save that as, File, Save As, and it will increment it to 3 there for me. So that's saved. Just let that save, and then we can select from here the render options. We can use distance mask, see how that looks. So with this now, what it's doing is it's giving us white for things that are further away and darker for things that are closer. So File, and we'll just save image. So well, I know we've got an export image and save image as. If I save image as, I'll bump that, that's okay. Bitmap. That's fine. Right, mask. Save that. Right, and now we've got PaintShop Pro. And I'll start dragging some files in. So I'll get my nice sharp image, which took a couple of minutes to render. I get my mask, and the point about the mask is that I can use this to filter between two images. So if I now adjust this image effect and blur this image, well, we go, it's in adjust, yeah, blur. So let's blur that more. That creates a very softened version of that image. So, but it's not as noisy as the lower raise per pixel premium rendering. And I go File, Save Copy As, Blurred Version. Okay, so now I've got those two, and that's remembered what it was called. So what I need to do is not save that and load in my blurred version, and then load in my sharp version. I can now use this to filter between the two. So I'll build it on the blurred version, and I can always invert this image if it turns out to be wrong. So I go Layers, New Mask Layer from Image. OK, just let it do that. Find yourself the mask, get OK, and you can see that it's making this bit that's closest to us less visible, more transparent. So if I do Control-C on this sharp version, and then go back to my combined mask layer now, and I go select the group, and then I need to add it as a layer, so I think that's Control-L. Right, I've got the layer, but the group's now behind that layer. So if I've reduced transparency, you see it's not interacting. So what I need to do is drag that so it's on the other side of that group, and now you can see that it's softened in the background. It's not perfect doing it this way, but it all depends on the power of the computer that you've got available to you. Obviously, I think the best would be to render out the entire scene with a high raise per pixel, and you would have the nicest results, but this is one option. You can also modify the mask itself. So if you've got the mask selected and then you adjust, and I think there's a way of, if you use the curves in here, then you can dynamically adjust the response here. If we use the preview modes, then you can change the point at which it's going to be in focus. So you can have the foreground out of focus and the background out of focus. If I use the minus thing here, we can see how this is adjusting it. So the background now is a dark area by putting that point down there, so that puts that in focus. So you can create really strange, by creating odd curves here, versions of how it can be in and out of focus. So just adding points. I think we can just add a point by clicking on there. You can have things coming in and out of focus in ways that you can't possibly get with the lens, which is interesting. So there you go. That's one way of sorting your depth of field out, and even creating artificial ways of producing different focuses in your scene. So just remember here that the white areas are the bits that are getting the blurred part more, just due to the fact that I'd selected to have the mask on the blurred image. So there you go. Quite a few options there, a few ideas to throw around. I hope you found that interesting, and will experiment yourself with either producing models in Wings 3D or experimenting with your depth of field in post work.